recorded shortly? There we go. So this meeting is being recorded, and there also is closed captioning available. You can find that by going up to the menu bar on your Zoom screen and going over to the 3 dots that say More, and then in that drop-down menu, choose View Full Transcript, and then you can see the sort of real-time transcription of the meeting. And with that, I think that we will move on to the opening inspiration, and Faith Graham, one of our committee members, has volunteered to offer that up tonight. Faith?
Awesome, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining. I also hope that you are finding beautiful ways to cope, sometimes even thrive in our groundless, shifting ways of understanding normal these days. Yesterday, I closed my computer after a very long day of meetings, and I felt really worn out. And it seems like I needed a little inspiration to show up as my best self, because I remembered a quote that was shared with me by a friend and colleague in response to how he aspires to show up in the world. And so I wanted to share these words with you all. These are words of Martin Luther King Jr. And many of you will know this because it's quite a popular quote. If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. We have someone in our midst who heeds this message of excellence, someone that every day brings compassion and integrity, grace and grit, wisdom and humility, someone who inspires me towards a better version of myself. And that someone has a birthday today, so I am told. Happy birthday, Sam. And thank you so much for inspiring me and all of us and doing the work that you do with excellence.
Thank you, Faith. I appreciate it. I really do. Thank you. I'm going to get someone else for sharing my birthday later.
Okay. All right. And Sam is 30. No, I'm joking. Okay, so we're going to move on to introductions now, and we'll start with Pcf committee members, and then move on to staff, and then members of the public. So Shanice?
Shanice Clark, she, they, committee member.
Faith?
Faith Graham, she, her, committee member. Happy birthday, Sam.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Moreland, he, him, committee member. Happy birthday, Sam.
Maria?
Maria Sippin, she, they, committee member.
Robin?
Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
Ranfis?
Ranfis Tino Vittoro, he, him. Happy birthday, Sam. And if I could just add, I don't know about street sweeper for Sam, but I will say when I first met you, Sam, you shared me a spreadsheet, and I was like, this guy is a spreadsheet guru, but it's so passionate about this work. And we met at a coffee shop, and I thought, man, this guy's had a lot of coffee, but you've proven over the years that the work that you put in, you really care and are really passionate with the work that you do. And I'll just say that if I could ever give you a gift, I'll try to impress you with a spreadsheet, a Google spreadsheet sometime in the future. So happy birthday, Sam.
Thank you, please.
Andrea?
Andrea Hamburg, she, her, committee member. Happy birthday, Sam. I'm pretty sure about a year and a half ago, you bought me a beer, and I think I still owe it to you back. So someday I will buy you a beer.
I will accept that.
Megan?
Megan Horst, she, her, committee member. And yeah, like everyone said, happy birthday, Sam. I can tell you're a Leo with all that fire energy. It was just my birthday too, so we share that in common. yeah, keep bringing the fire.
Michael?
Michael and Hill, committee member, he, him. Happy birthday, Sam.
All right, we're going to move on to staff, but just as a reminder for members of the public who may have joined late to put your name if you have an organizational affiliation and if you want to share your preferred pronouns into the chat box so that we can introduce you after the staff introductions. So we'll start with Janet.
Janet Hammer, PCEF staff, she, her, and yeah, really glad you were born, Sam. If there was anybody who was born to be the right person to be leading us, that was you. And I hope you have a happy birthday and maybe a little well-deserved break.
Wendy?
Sorry, Wendy Kelfkin, she, her, PCEF staff. And I do happen to know that the only thing Sam really wants for his birthday is to finish this meeting on time tonight so he can go on his vacation.
Not just on time, but with a few particular things wrapped up.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Yeah. So James is not with us tonight. He's taking a day. And so I'm Katie Lister, PCEF staff, she, her pronouns, and I will turn it over to the birthday guy.
Thank you all. I really appreciate this. Sam Brasso, he, him, PCEF staff. As an August birthday, I do not usually care to celebrate my birthday. I like just quietly celebrating. So I appreciate all this, and I will find out who has leaked my birthday. I mean, I am scrubbing everyone from Facebook, and I will find this, but I appreciate this nonetheless. So thank you all. And with that, thank you to everyone who is in the meeting this evening. We've got Deidre Schutz, Nutrition Garden RX, she, her. Jenny Hall, she, her, Energy Trust of Oregon. Mark D'Arienzo, Climate Jobs PDX, he, him. Maggie Johnson, Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, she, her, Director of Housing Development and Management. Angela Previdelli, she, her, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. James Donnelly, Elevate Energy. Gail Palmer, East Portland Action Plan and the Centennial Community Association. Scott Sander, he, him, Exceed Enterprises. Catherine Martin, graduate student at Oregon State, at University of Oregon. Would not mix the two up. And Anissa Pemberton, they, them, PCEF Community Coalition. And let's see if I've got anyone else. And Emily Davis, Kelly Nonprofit Consulting, she, her.
And is there anyone on the phone line that just called in?
I'm going to unmute phone line. Looks like we have someone, but I think they may need to unmute themselves on their end.
This person on the phone, if you want to introduce yourself, just go ahead and unmute. That's okay too. All right. It doesn't look like anybody signed up for public comment that in the chat box, and so we are not going to, so we can get moving then with the agenda. Before I forget, I wanted to ask if anybody had any edits or comments or revisions to the August 5th minutes. All right, seeing none, we will accept those minutes and get going. Sam, are there any program updates today? We kind of have this on as a standing agenda item, but.
Yeah, I think the only one that I'll bring up, and it's just in James's absence, and I know Wendy has been working on this as well. We're just busily working through the application support grants and should be publicly, we'll be reaching out to the initial awardees early next week. And we'll be developing just some communications and press to get that out, likely towards the end of next week, probably the early following week. So we will share that with you all as soon as we find that out. But we're working through that, and really, really excited by what I think what you all will see soon. So it's a teaser, but stay tuned. It'll be exciting. And that's it.
All right. Well, so the first thing up on the agenda is to kind of come back to the scoring or the distribution of points. So really the conversation that we had at the last meeting. We got a lot of good feedback from you all, and are now going to take another run at it. We spent a fair amount of time kind of looking across the small and the large and the planning grants, particularly the small and the large, to make sure that there was consistency, and where there wasn't consistency, there was a really good reason for that inconsistency. And to that end, we have a couple of slides each for large and small, and then one for planning. And then we also sent a memo, which is posted online and was sent to committee members, that kind of provides a little bit more detail just about the small and the large, and kind of the differences in which criteria apply to applications depending on the type of project there are. There's not that same distinction with planning grants, because there's not like planning grants that include construction and things like that. So it's a little bit more straightforward, which is why you don't see that same kind of comparison table in the memo that we sent you. So just at a high level, the large grants have, there are 27 sort of total potential criteria by which an application could receive a score. The factors that impact which set of criteria is used for scoring are 3 things, and that is whether or not the project includes a physical improvement, and that physical improvement is not just construction. That could also be planting trees, other sort of green infrastructure and regenerative agriculture kind of activity. The second sort of factor that impacts which set of criteria is used for scoring is whether or not the project requires a construction workforce. And that really is, those projects really will be more like when things are being built or major renovations. And then, or installation of infrastructure, or installation of, new equipment. And then the third one is the size of the single site construction budget. And I know that we've gone over this a number of times, and just maybe for the sake of members of the public, just to sort of explain that a little bit. But so if you have a grant that includes construction, if any single site in that project has a construction budget which is $500,000 or greater, then that triggers kind of another set of questions on the application and then scoring criteria. If you have a project that has multiple sites and when you add them all together, they are more than 500,000, it does not trigger those additional questions. It's just when it's a single site that is has a construction budget of 500,000 or greater. So what that ends up, the outcome is that you end up essentially with 4 different project types for large grants. And each of those project types will be scored on between 13 and 27 of the criterion, depending on which of those types they are, with the smallest number of criterion applying to projects that have no physical improvements and no construction workforce, and then obviously no single site that is greater than 500,000. So this table, the next slide, just kind of shows the distribution of points across the different categories. And these are the kind of reconvened, or like these are a different categorization than we were using for a while, which included like social benefits, workforce and contractor benefits, environmental benefits, and based on sort of the committee's desire to really like pull out and see how we were providing points that gave benefit to organizations that had staff and board that reflected the community they intended to serve, and also were really focusing on serving PCEF priority populations. We pulled them out. All of those are now, all of those are now worth 50%. So those two criteria together, that preference for reflecting the community serve and serving PCEF priority populations across all of the project types, are worth 50% of the total score. For the projects that have physical improvements and a construction budget in a single site of over $500,000, 10% of the score goes to criteria that give a preference for reflecting the community serve, and 40% for serving priority population, which is different than the other ones. So just wanted to point that out, and because the other ones are all 15%, 35% respectively. And the reason for that is because, the primary driver behind that is that when you get a construction site over 500,000, or a construction budget at a single site of $500,000 or greater, there are a lot of questions that are related to the workforce and use of apprentices, and a lot of them are focused on ensuring that workforce, the workforce and the apprentice utilization is inclusive and is benefiting as many priority populations as possible. So we wanted to, it's just to sort of reflect both the level of effort that the applicants will be putting forth in that section of the application, and also just sort of the additional benefit that we're really trying to hone in on those bigger projects for the workforce that are involved in them. So then you can see also in the lines below, project description and scope, environmental benefits, budget, and then other. Things are relatively consistent, with the exception of environmental benefit being worth only 7% for projects that have no physical improvement and no construction workforce. And most of kind of the balance of what it is not there ends up in the project description and scope. And that is just really to reflect the reality that it's much harder, it will be much harder for projects that don't build something to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction and sequestration measures that we're looking at in the environment section, that make up most of the points in that section. Are there any questions on this one?
And so I just want to jump in real quick to say the key things we kept, as you saw, consistent. The budget is remaining consistent across all these at 10%. And, yeah. And at the top two, at least the top two categories, sum up to 50%.
Okay, so then for small grants, there's a total of 20 potential criteria that are used for scoring, and there are just two factors that kind of drive which set of those criteria are applied to which type of project, and that is whether or not there's physical improvement, and then whether or not there's a construction workforce that's needed. Because small grants are capped at 200,000, there's not going to be a project where where $500,000 or more is used at a single site of PCEF funds. So that one doesn't apply to these. We end up with 3 different types of projects, or kind of 3 that have different scoring criteria applied to them, and they are scored on 13 to 20 of the criteria depending on the type. So, and you'll see in the next slide, similar, I mean, it sort of follows a similar path and a similar logic to the large grants. So for these ones, because there's not that single site, all of the 50% total score up at the top that is for preference for reflecting the community serve and serving PCEF priority populations, those are all the same, with 15% going to the top criteria and 35% going to the latter. And then again, you'll see that the environmental benefits is a smaller percentage of total score for projects with no physical improvement, and that budget is consistent across the board. Any questions, thoughts on this or the memo? No? Okay, so this is the last slide before just kind of like comments and questions. And this is just shows the planning grants and the breakdown of the point distribution there. So for these projects, because there's not an actual project happening yet that is serving a priority population, we split the 50% evenly. And so that criteria for serving that category, which includes criteria for serving PCEF priority populations, is really for focus on what the project that is being planned for, which, like we talked about last time, is a little bit uncertain. Some folks might come in knowing exactly what kind of project they want to do, and some folks might come in at more of a kind of early exploration stage. But we really want to lean even a little bit more heavily into investing in organizations that reflect the communities that they serve, and giving them the resources to do planning so that they can develop projects. So that top line one, the preference for reflecting communities served, is now 25% of the total score. The project description and scope is 32%. There's not really like environmental benefit or social benefit because the project isn't happening yet. A lot of the categories that the criteria that apply to the other sections just don't, or to the other types of grants aren't relevant for these. Budget is still at 10%. There is a 4% of the score that can be earned by, for an organization, if they are small or emerging, and that's an either or. And then 4% that kind of falls into this other category. All right. So that was it, guys. And this is where we kind of just wanted to get your questions, your comments, your feedback, and then as a birthday present to Sam, a proposal to advance, no, not really, but that's our end game here, is a proposal to advance the small and planning grant application content so that we can move it forward with getting finalized. And then also a proposal to accept the small, large, and planning grant scoring distribution. Michael, I see hands going up and down. Michael?
I kind of wanted to say thank you very much for putting this in a way that makes sense, and that really this makes me feel much better. It may say this exact same thing that we saw last week, but it definitely makes me feel much better. So I appreciate that, and that's all I have to say. So thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we do have a pie chart, you know, in the wings, just in case. So, but thank you. No, Andrea.
I'm much happier with this scoring distribution. The consistency of 50% benefiting the population we're trying to benefit, and the consistent 10% budget score. I think between those two things, I'm relieved and happy. Thank you.
Rainpiece?
Just a curious question. Was there a reason why the information was presented in a way where you couldn't really see the workforce or contractor benefit scoring?
No, I mean, the main reason that we kind of rolled up, the main reason that we started presenting the information based on kind of to show the points that were really focused on serving the PCEF priority population and reflecting, and reflecting the community that is being served, is to kind of be more focused on that lens. And in part because that was feedback that we got from you. And it just so happens that a lot of the workforce falls into that. Like, a lot of the workforce criteria feeds into the total for serving the PCEF priority populations. But I mean, we certainly could provide that information sliced and diced in a different way as well, although not at this meeting.
Not at this meeting, yeah. I think it's. I think it is true to say that certain items in the criteria within workforce and contracting do answer the priority populations. Other scoring and criteria items within workforce and contracting don't. So I don't know if that was separated and that's on the other marker. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
That provides better. Oh, go ahead, Sam. Yeah.
Just for instance, on the large grants, with single sites over 500,000, the other the criteria, for instance, for either apprenticeship utilization and/or paying prevailing wage was required at that size actually. So it was below, for instance, when you had below 500,000, the criteria for paying prevailing wage and utilizing apprentices, not the actual diverse apprentice utilization, but utilizing apprentices, those fell into the other category.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that helps provide some clarity. I think my only thoughts on this, if I were to look, like, for example, like on small grants, if I were to say, it's, I think, difficult to look at this on this graph, but if we had someone apply specifically on workforce and just got a big fat 0 on diversity, they could still get close to an A, well, definitely an A, if not an A+, if they score well on other items. I think we're kind of late in the process, but I think it's helpful for me to know, like, how it's broken down, priority served, and what this means systemically. I think around workforce diversity, and I know contract diversity is a separate, criteria, but I do appreciate the work here in trying to make this clear, and I think demonstrating community served. I know this can be a challenge, in all, again, I think when we take a step back and what we're trying to benefit systemically, but I'm probably a broken record on this. I think it's just, the workforce pieces will be a question into year 2 as we evaluate this. But I do appreciate steps to, I think, make this clear for the committee.
Okay, thanks, Francis. Faith?
A couple of things. One, I really do appreciate this presentation and the memo that was sent. It's really super clear. And I think that this has changed a bit from last week, given the allocation. And so one overarching question, which I'm really pleased about, and the allocations, but I'm really curious if anything came up for staff that was an aha or something that feels still yet left undone that you want to share with us. If just what came out of the process of having to go back again and again, and to also to reorganize, if any lesson came out of that. And I also I raised my hand because Rampisa, I wanted to know or point you to that memo and see whether or not that was provided any clarity to the question you were asking, because in the memo you can see where workforce shows up in each of the categories. It doesn't give the points, so you have to go back to an old memo to look at the points for each specific criteria. But I do think it's kind of helpful to see, oh, where is workforce showing up in each of these? Because each of those questions are there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helped or not.
Yeah. That does help, Faith, and I did take a look at that memo. But I think as we've done here from the beginning, as we clump workforce and contractor, they're two categories under one. And as we've kind of reshifted and did rescoring, it still is the case that you can have a project that has a strong recruitment strategy around diverse contracting and score really well in this section, if not get half the points. It may do really poorly on say workforce diversity, demonstration of workforce diversity strategies and or the types of benefits paid, and still get an A, close to A+, if I were to score it as if it were a homework assignment. And I think that's just something, just to be transparent as we move forward. Like that's I think what we're okay with here at this stage. And I think it's just me just kind of voicing like, I think what we're hoping to aspire for PCEF is obviously we want priority populations to benefit, but I think that's also on the workforce side. And that's where the challenges are. That's just where, if you look at construction in general and in the clean energy space, we just know the disparities are there, and I just don't know, what our application is really pushing our applicants to do, or pushing the industry for that matter to do. But I think it is the memo does provide clarity. It's just I think I'm just pointing out a specific sliver within the contractor and workforce, both the contract and workforce scoring criteria.
That's really helpful for me. Thank you, Rampees. Now I understand.
Shanice?
Thank you all for providing some space to revisit this. And I think in the way that the table is reflected, there definitely is more of a sense of clarity and consistency in as we're breaking down how to both articulate and keep track of the impacts of each of these different kinds of projects. A part of me just wants to just on record express just I guess the hesitation that I feel, or the concern that I feel around hopefully as we continue the systems that we might create in the long term. And I think what Ron Feast is reflecting on is something that I'm also sitting with. But this criteria and the way in which we're allocating our points, I think there's this inherent value for what the PCEF grant funds are supposed to do, and the criteria that we're looking at. I think that an organization that might not necessarily be the kinds of candidates or beneficiaries that we are intending to score well, and maybe are in a position to do that. So I think there's some space that talks about the preference for reflecting the community served in that balance, and what it means when folks don't score well in that area and have good applications. And I think that the line or the space to be within, especially in that workforce area where people are positioned differently to both answer and address that. I think if we're separating criteria, it makes sense for the questions to adapt to those contexts. So there's not really anything helpful in offering in that regard, but I think I just wanted to name that that there could be more work that I think inherently would support the long-term inherent function of the work we're trying to do, and I just do worry about I worry about it as well.
I would love to answer, and I'm trying to think if I want to go back to answer Faith's question and maybe a little bit to Shanice and Renfis, and let me do that real quick and see. I think there were changes, Faith, that, I mean, I think that the consistency was one that as we went through, you know, I think we've taken, as you know, we've taken different approaches as we've gone back and forth, and as we went through and took this lens, I mean, it was making sure that we were, I mean, I think just understanding that we're holding budget and the other categories consistent did force us to adjust the other categories. Generally speaking, we were all still in alignment, but that just, it forced us to see, okay, where, I mean, it's that relative value. So it didn't, but it brought that consistency to say, okay, would we in a small grant or in a grant where you have no physical improvements and no construction workforce, does it make sense that one of these criteria are worth this much more? So it's just that consistency, that exercise and making sure there's consistency helped, and I think it was a good exercise in terms of making sure that everything aligned ultimately. So I think that was really valuable to see. And at the same, and I think the reality is, I mean, Memphis, to your point, you're right in that the only place where we're explicitly asking about workforce in an explicit way for an applicant is really the large grants where you have investments over 500,000. And so below that, we are working on our grant criteria itself. And that's something that is going to be an iteration where we're working with our grantees, where they're expected to sit with us. And as part of our grant agreement, they're expected to sit with us and work through with us what their workforce and contractor equity strategy is. And that's a place where we're going to learn. So I just want to know that it's that teasing out where is the best place. And I don't think we'll know fully what we can do there until we do it. But that'll certainly be a big learning area for us. And then, I mean, maybe lastly, Shanice, to your point, I'll just share if our application support grants are any indication, you know, and you'll see this shortly with our ability to fund 40 organizations, we'll have a pretty solid list of organizations that are Black and Indigenous led getting funded out of that. And yet there will still be lessons learned there where we created a process that was accessible and yet folks will still slip through. And when I say slip through, what I mean is maybe, is it exactly, did they learn how to answer the question right? And so I think that's always going to be a tension of what is the application we set forth? Who does it? You know, did we balance it in the right way where we got everyone that we wanted to get in, but it means sometimes some others may get in as well. And so that's just a tension that we're always going to wrestle with as we set something up in terms of what is, I don't know, it's what's that acceptable level of having folks that come in that you might not want to, because otherwise the balance to it has been, and I think we will certainly go back as we set up the mini grants, take these lessons learned in terms of tweaking that process. And it's also just, it means something different when you're putting out 200,000, when you're putting out 8 million versus when you're putting out 40. So all of these will be incremental. We'll be taking lessons learned, and as soon as we wrap up the application support grants, we will be coming back. We will be coming back to you all just to share what were the results, what we learned from that, and how we will tweak the mini grants in response to what we saw here.
Michael?
And I'd just like to respond to Shanice's, to what Shanice was saying. And I may be wrong, but I think that as a committee member and a staff, we have to look at, part of our job is to look at these, not just as, did you fulfill the score, but to look at applications with a critical eye. And it's our job to kind of read in between the lines, to know a little bit about our community organizations. We've all been involved in some organizations within the community, not necessarily all of them clearly. But you know, we know our communities, we know some of the organizations in our communities. And I think that it's up to us to make sure that we look at all the applications or all the grant applications with a very critical eye towards what the organizations really look like and what they're really trying to achieve and who they're really serving.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, to kind of stay on the same topic. When it comes to the workforce and also the contractors, I see that I'm looking at the old memos, around 20% of the points goes towards that. And I think the biggest, I'm okay with that, especially considering most of this really does apply to the 500K and more large grant category. And the way I look at it is that we've put so much effort into making sure that the actual organizations that are going to get these grants are going to reflect the community. So with that, I think we should have an expectation that when your organization reflects the community, then they will hire people that look like them. Is something that I look into, and usually what you have is organizations that don't reflect the community, and then say, yeah, by the way, we're going to hit this diversity goal when it's not reflected in their own backyard, for lack of a better word. So I think that because we have put so much, put a precedent on the actual organizations themselves representing the community they claim they're going to be help benefiting, I think that's going to help offset some of that. So not only, if they don't score high on the workforce and contractor portion, I doubt they will score high on the organizational structure portion as well, because most likely they won't have diversity within their organization as well. So those two will kind of piggyback off of one another. And if we're wrong, and also like Mike said, we're going to have to do our own due diligence as reviewers. And if we're wrong, I mean, we can always add more points to the contractor and equity portion as well. So at this point, I'm comfortable with what we have right now, as long as, as we go through this process, if we don't get what we're looking for, that we're willing to make those adjustments as we see fit.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Megan?
Yeah, hi, thanks. And to staff for this memo and kind of a reconfiguration of things and for the conversation. And I just wanted to say that I too appreciate the clarity, that it's much clearer to me, especially across the various grant programs. And I am glad that I see that we have kind of clarified and honed in our focus and close to 50% scoring, priority served populations and all of that. And I think that maybe I don't fully understand Shanice's concern. So if there's a chance, I maybe want it to be restated. But is the concern that an organization that doesn't serve priority populations could still do well in the scoring? Is that the basic concern that you're raising, Shanice?
That's part of it. I think the way in which we're structuring and allocating points, I think consistency is the theme, and I feel like we're now looking at a set of criteria that definitely provides more consistency and clarity, especially around populations reflected and served. And at the same time, we are definitely just wanting to name the reality of that there is a lot of interest and folks are waiting to participate in this program, and folks will do well with those criteria that I'm looking at that might not be the folks who we're thinking about and talking about. And so whether or not that shows up and how much it shows up is definitely a conversation. But I'm hearing about it in spaces. I'm hearing people are have plans for these funds, and so just wanted us to be cautious.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I remember Commissioner Hardesty came and said the same thing pretty much a few weeks ago. So it's just a good thing to keep at the forefront. And yeah, and especially if certain organizations have good grant writers, they may succeed in convincing reviewers of things too. And anyway, but it does remind me that the process isn't only that we score and there's just an average score applied among the 3 reviewers and that's who gets the highest score. We also have these panel conversations where we'll talk through things, and that's where we'll hopefully bring in what Michael was talking about, is some sort of discussion of those things, I hope. But overall, I feel good about where we are. If people had thoughts on really specific changes to make that might address that concern, I'm open, but I also feel good about the overall weighting, and I appreciate staff's coming back to us. And yeah, thanks, Shanice, for helping me understand the concern more, and I appreciate you keeping that at the forefront.
Ramsey?
I will likely vote for this, but I think I just feel like systemically early, we've always tried to make the small grant, quote unquote, much easier for smaller and emerging groups. And so I think as we've tried to make things consistent, I feel like that's kind of shifted things. Part of me still feels like, I think it's a false dynamic, but the dynamic I've seen sort of play out is workforce equity and the balance for, new or small emerging organizations we'd love to see be competitive in this. I think my biggest gripe is I feel like, I think we've kind of let other organizations that should demonstrate their commitment to workforce equity off the hook. And I think this is an area where in construction, there's disparities, not just in diversity within construction and all the different classified trades, but also even issues of pay equity, where there's no prevailing wage and no clarity around wages. Perhaps that might be clarified with PCEF's own legislation on minimum wage on this. But, again, on the consistency point, I think I brought it up in the past. I'd love to see, like we've done with planning grants, 10 additional points for new and small emerging groups that we keep saying we would prioritize to make this benefit. And I think we keep saying we've done it by making the application easier. I just still think we've made it easier for everyone, that if we really were trying to prioritize those groups, make them competitive, just give them 5 or 10 extra points all across the board and all our different grant programs. To me, that just seems cleaner. But, I think I'm here to learn, and I think we'll go through this process. I think to answer Michael's point, I feel like we might know community groups, but I feel like to ensure that we don't have bias in this process, we kind of just have to score based on what we're receiving in the application. So if there are things that we're scoring and we see applications are competitive and we feel like that doesn't feel like an alignment, one, it's an opportunity to check our own biases. 2, that might just be a deficiency in the application that we crafted. It might be a reflection for how we restructure that in the future. But it is kind of in my experience, it's been like, you try not to bring in your own personal information or bring in more information that others just don't have. It's just probably a question that we might have to answer together as a committee as we move forward, for applications that we have more or less information. But it's probably good practice to keep score based on the information we have in the application, then beyond the application.
Thanks, Francis. Sam, did you want to say something?
Maybe I'll just speak to, you all will be on the scoring panels, and Ramface, I agree with you in terms of reading what's on the application, but at the same end, you bring your lived experience into these applications, and when you read an application, your ability to read an application and understand what someone is trying to say is a critical piece. You being the committee that you are, it's important that when you get an application from a group that where English may not be their priority language, that you're able to read that application and understand what they're able to say. Whereas a group where they've got mastery of it and they've got grant writers, you also can read through and understand that that's a good grant writer. So it is really important that you bring your lens into that application and be able to read between the lines, not necessarily bringing additional information around necessarily what you know about a particular organization, given the biases that exist there, but your ability to actually sit there and read that. So I think that's it's an important piece in terms of why you all being on the scoring panels as well. So just
Michael.
So I think, Ramfis, one of the things that I was thinking about was I know the $1 billion big name nonprofits, and that's who I'm kind of, when I say I'm watching out for, that's kind of what I was, more what I was thinking, as to having a critical eye towards.
Shanice?
I just want to comment on Ranfis's previous recommendation. I think if there's capacity for that, it makes a lot of sense for us to consider awarding points that might not necessarily be tied to what we're looking at, but it could be to these kinds of organizations to give them a boost in a process that we might recognize as just inherently inequitable. And I think to Megan's point around a specific recommendation, I think there's been a bunch of previous things from folks that have been shared. Something I'm grappling with is the scope in particular. I guess the kinds of organizations or the folks that we've been hearing from who may be considering a physical improvement in their project or may not, but have a very powerful purpose and mission and connection to this overall goal of preparing resiliency in our communities in different ways through education or through different kinds of partnerships. So I think the scope inevitably there's just a different way it shows up with the scoring criteria, but now there's more consistency with the other pieces there. So I would concur with Renfis's recommendation, and that would be great for us to consider.
I did, so if I could maybe just to speak for a minute to the kind of points for small and emerging, I want to make sure that the committee, I guess, remembers that we heard from a lot of folks in the community that there was a strong desire to reward people who have been doing this work. So, so in the large grants, for example, under one of the criteria under organizational capacity that is fairly heavily weighted, you can't get all of the points unless you have been doing this work with a primary purpose, serving the beneficiary population for 3 years or more. And so there are a couple of things happening. I think one, we've coupled small and emerging, and they're not that might be appropriate or not. So we've defined small as 6 FTE, so 6 full-time equivalent staff, and emerging as just having existed for fewer than 3 years. And certainly there are very small nonprofits that, you know, may have existed for 20 years and might be able to get all of those points for having been doing the work. So I guess there's that issue of whether or not those two things really belong together. I think that we felt it made sense to sort of prioritize both small and or emerging for planning, recognizing that smaller organizations tend to have like less back of office capacity and kind of less time within their organization, generally less kind of general funds to do that kind of to resource planning projects. And that emerging organizations would really benefit from being resourced to do planning because they just may not have been around for long enough to do that. So there isn't kind of a dissonance in having them together in the planning grants, but there may be if we move that same criteria into small or large. And one question that we have discussed as staff is just sort of what it is that we would be trying to achieve by giving points to small nonprofits who are applying for small or large grants. So what are our assumptions about what a small nonprofit sort of is or does, and is that true? So I guess I would ask the committee, I guess maybe if you are thinking about wanting to integrate some priority for small and emerging, to think about those two things, both do small and emerging belong together, and for small and large grants, and then also if we are trying to if we are prioritizing small grants, and why?
And maybe I would add, I mean, there are large groups that have historically not done climate planning work that are certainly larger than our application support grants would allow, and yet these will be groups. I mean, it's something to also consider. There are groups that are not necessarily small, but have historically not had resources to work in this space. So it's just another facet to what do we mean by small? And that's something that's coming up as folks have reached out about the application support grants, and as we had a filter there, which was no more than 20 FTE, and we'll certainly substantially be funding groups that are substantially smaller than that.
Ramses? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, since I highlighted it, I mean, it's kind of late in the game. I don't want us to throw a wrench in the process since we've got to really start finalizing the application. I recall that we've had this conversation around what is the definition of small, what's the definition of emerging. It was all within the context of how do we make sure that this is inclusive for small and emerging groups in our different applications. I think I'm just trying to highlight the inconsistency here on that matter. And I recall it's taken shape here on planning grants, but I think the context of my point was just, it was very much the framework of how we designed the small grants, as we've kind of made sure that everything is consistent around scoring between large, planning, and small. I think it's kind of shifted things to be reflective of what we've done early in the design process with the small grants. I think I'm digressing here. I think the point is, I think that's an inconsistency in areas that we've, I think, tried to be consistent. And even hearing this conversation, it feels inconsistent with things we've said in the past. I think it's a reflection moving forward of, as I'm looking at my notes and minutes, like it's just discussion points that we've had back in April and May as we were designing this. And I think it's just something we should just try to recognize, just see if we can be consistent in the future. And when we do deviate, and as we're noting, making any of this inclusive for groups that have been doing this great work, we should try to make sure that's reflective. And again, all the grants, or if we just decide large grants. But I think some consistency where possible is appreciated, and I know that's easier said than done in this first year. But I don't want to throw, in offering that, I just don't want to throw the process further out since we're kind of in the final weeks here.
Famous last words. Shanice?
I resonate a lot with that, and just want to echo. You know, I'm sharing this because I do think it's so important, this foundation that we're setting in the program, and I resonate with that. We kind of named the 3 things, factors, and Ramses is right. It showed up in the context of the structure of the planning grants. But if we're thinking about organizations that are quote unquote small or emerging or historically excluded from clean energy kind of work, I think historically excluded, I think those are the 3 kinds of organizations who I think may have had this space envisioning why our work is possible. And so maybe there can be an opportunity to reflect on an additional kind of bonus factor where small, emerging, or organizations comprised of folks who have been excluded from this work get a boost in a system that we see and acknowledge is just inherently inequitable. And I do think this conversation, as close as we are to finishing it, I do think this could be a really positive space of resistance in the context of how folks will experience this process, recognizing we do have a space and a panel to make judgment, but I'm not looking at it. I think bias is important to name. I'm not looking at this committee as me, the person who you know, ultimately is PCEF. I think PCEF is a public body that is accountable to everyone, and there will be a day that we're not here. And what do we leave those folks with is a long-term conversation. But yes, I think all of that. Are we setting this up where any old person can walk in here and say, I understand what these funds are supposed to do? So I think the boost would be great.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I'll add is just we're not done here. I do really want the committee to think in that this really is the first step. And as we come back, and I think some of these next slides will tease up some additional options as we move to talk about allocations that folks can think about. But as we go into this, we are committed to taking a really deep dive and analysis of all the actual outcomes of our process. In addition, just asking the applicants basic questions around their experience in going through this. It's something that we know is absolutely critical in our first go because we're going to miss so many things. And so there's several pieces where we're constantly trying to balance. And I know that I hope that coming out of the gate we've taken our best go at balancing them, but we won't really know how it lands until we see how people actually really come through on our applications. So I want that to be that commitment to learning through this and taking this and not just taking this and tweaking it at its margins as we come back around next year, but wholesale working through this again. So I just wanted to make sure to say that so as you all continue to offer your thoughts and comments. Because really appreciate it.
Do other committee members have thoughts about this sort of the idea of that Shanice has put forth about small and emerging, or small and or emerging points? Faith?
No, I do. I would so love it if other committee members who haven't had a chance to speak yet would like to offer something first, but I didn't want to move on. So I don't know if anybody just wants to start talking. Just give you a couple seconds. Go, Robin.
Sorry, I didn't put my hands up. I got lost in the buttons. I think, for me is, I love to be able to support smaller organizations, emerging organizations. But at this point, with us being the first year, we really don't know kind of how things are set up. And I think we've given these topics, both sides, all sides, ample conversations and ample consideration. But at the end of the day, we have no data to work with. And for me, just speaking for me, it's kind of very difficult for me. I all these ideas are great. I don't have really a strong opinion because this is year one or year zero. I would like to revisit this next year or whenever it's the appropriate time, when we have some data, we've seen some results, and then tweak the points, allocations, scoring criteria, whatever you want to call it, accordingly with, some real data in our hands. So that's kind of where I'm, sitting, and that's why, probably haven't really commented too much on this. Is, everything is a guessing game at this point. So that's my 2 cents.
Maria?
Yeah, I see a lot of value in boosting up small businesses in every way we can. And I think adding those preferential points can help formalize that. The other way I look at it too is kind of what Sam was saying in response to Ramfis was around like what we bring and the lens we bring. And maybe there is some room here for us to really operate with our discretion in some way in how we allocate points, and using that power and that lens as we review applications to make those decisions on our own. And then if it works out that the committee also operates that way, but I think adjusting points is one option, but I also see the value in adopting what we have and kind of waiting to see what other adjustments we can make in the future, and trusting what we have developed today. But I don't have any strong feelings, but I also think that the committee should exercise their power in the decision-making and scoring process to some degree. And I think that means a whole lot.
Faith?
I just wanted to thank Ramfis and Shanice for the courage of saying we have time to do it right. Because we do, even though we do feel this rush, and your courage and integrity to say, if this doesn't feel right, to raise. So I really, really appreciate that. And of course, yes, this is year zero and we are going to learn a lot. I'm most concerned about, I think that when we started, and maybe this is revisionist, and Ramfis, I welcome you telling me this is revisionist history here, but I think what we said when we were talking about small and emerging back in January, February, March, and April was, how do we make sure that there is not a barrier for small and emerging to compete with existing nonprofits, right? With larger nonprofits. How are we being sure that we're not creating a system that someone cannot participate in. And so for me, it's really appropriate that the planning grant, for example, has points for that, because that's where I want planning money to go, right? It's also why, I think that's why we created these mini grants. And now I'm confusing the 2 grants that are out there already, right? But the ability for people to get support so that they can put in an application that is really relevant and is really specific and scores really high. One thing I wanted to point out was something that Shanice and Sam touched on as well. Like, if we were talking about small, emerging, and those that are traditionally left out of the climate space, and all of those were in the same bucket, I would say we've got to tear this apart and, you know, start over again. But I don't think that small and emerging points are going against, right? If we don't include small and emerging points, I don't think that is detracting from us giving points that are already exist in this scoring criteria to those that have been traditionally left out of this space. So I think we are boosting those priority populations and priority groups that are already working in this space. What I'm concerned about is adding, like Katie was saying, is that we might have competing priorities in the 2 scoring criteria. And I think that mixed message is not helpful for us. So I'm concerned about actually adding any additional points, given that potential conflict in the small grants and the large grants. And I would say I would be most comfortable moving ahead with what we've got now, knowing that if we learn a lot, which we will, we'll come back and revisit it if it's not the right outcome.
If I can respond to that, Faith, I do recall that conversation we had around a few years ago, well, a few months ago, concept of time, where we had this discussion around making the application by design accessible for small and emerging organizations. And I think part of that was we felt like some larger organizations or organizations that have been around who've demonstrated success were going to do pretty well in answering some of these questions. I think it was just the question of for small, for large, especially when we're sort of trying to tackle some of these like workforce and contracting questions that we were like, we don't know how we'll answer these questions. I do recall like offering that 5-point suggestion, like, or offering additional points for groups that we think maybe they'll still be left behind. I think it just got, maybe that's revisionist history on my end, but I do remember offering sort of that point suggestion. I think it just got reflected just on the planning side. You know, I think when I made my comment, I thought just across the board for many applications, it's just in planning. I think it's, you know, I appreciate, I think, what Robin's suggestion, like we're near zero, we're learning. I just, you know, that's just the timeline that I recall some of this conversation. And, you know, maybe hopefully I didn't capture it wrong, staff, because I think you all were part of this conversation. And we're also, I think, raising up the design concerns for smaller emerging, or smerging, I guess is the new, we've merged them together term. But, you know, I think it's, I have to look back on my notes again, like what's been the timeline around just this specific theme. But sorry, yeah, I think we're learning. I think I just wanted to highlight what I thought was the history or the timeline of this conversation on this thing.
Megan?
Yeah, hi. I appreciate this conversation and the discussion on small and emerging and historically underserved, although I do hear Katie's point that those are not necessarily the same, like there are different definitions there. And I guess where I'm landing right now is that I have some concerns if we tried to do a boost around small and emerging. I think that would conflict with some of the criteria we have around showing previous ability to thrive, previous like success as an organization in implementing programs. So I don't know if those conflict, and there is some good rationale for wanting organizations that are about to get that are applying for large grants to maybe not be emerging. They may be best suited for planning and small grants in the short term and the mini grants, and like that's who we had in mind when we designed those, I think. So I guess I'm sort of feeling like the small, emerging, and technical assistance or planning application assistance grants, we specifically want to be helping emerging and maybe smaller organizations with those. I'm a little worried that some of our criteria might, well, and maybe that's okay, they counter each other if it's just a boost point and not an actual point. So I don't know, I guess I'm also starting to like think about the technicalities of it all and wondering what a boost point means exactly. Is it like, are we changing the 100 or is it an add-on? Maybe there's a couple ways to do that, I don't know. And I'm hopeful that all of our work to talk about organizations that have a track record of serving priority populations gets at the organizations that historically have not been funded in this space. I'm hopeful. If it doesn't, then I think we have work to do, but I'm hopeful we have addressed that. Yeah, so those are some thoughts I have. And I'm really glad we have the planning and mini grant and project assistance grants. I think those are going to target some of these emerging groups. So I guess I lean towards being fairly comfortable with what we have now, but being very attentive to that issue among many other ones as we see what comes in and reflect. But I do hear the concerns. So I'm just wrestling with the reality, like with all the things to weigh. I'm done, sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. We haven't heard maybe from Jeffrey, Andrea, or Michael on this. Do you have, any of you have thoughts you'd like to share on this subject? Jeffrey?
I agree. I think at this point, like I said earlier, I think I'm comfortable with what we have right now. And I think we're going to learn a whole lot this first year and revisit a lot of these different things here. So, and I think everybody has the right mindset. So we'll come and address these head on and ask honest questions and have real reflection and try to make the adjustments necessary to get the results that we're actually looking for. So that's kind of where my perspective is at this point. I think we've done a lot of good work. I think we've been very thorough with our work. And I think at this juncture, it's time to see, you know, where the rubber hits the road and where it ends up.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Michael?
I like what Jeffrey just said about we're all uncomfortable with aspects of this application. I think that I know where I sit on workforce and input from workforce from the get-go, workforce versus contractor input. You know, I am uncomfortable where we're sitting with that, but and I'm sure that all of us have things that we are uncomfortable with in this. But yeah, I'm ready to learn something from going forward at this point for myself.
Andrea?
No, I think I feel like the additional points in a planning grant process feels right to me. Supporting newer organizations in accessing funds to develop a project that then could more likely successfully compete for funding in the future. And you know, I do want to. I'm moved by a call to recognize the organizations that have been doing this work. So that's where I sit.
Thanks, Andrea. there any other thoughts on this topic? I guess I'm going to ask for a temperature check on a proposal. And I mean, I can't make a proposal because I'm not a committee member, but I just would want kind of ask how folks would feel. There's kind of two separate things, and maybe we just should separate them. The first one feels like a little bit easier because it doesn't involve the point allocation. And that is the proposal to advance the small and planning grant application content to be finalized, to be able to work with our communications and user experience folks and kind of create greater accessibility there. So if I could get if I could get a temperature check on that, and then maybe move on to getting a temperature check on the proposal to accept the small, large, and planning, unless there's an idea from the committee or SAM on kind of an alternate path from here. Does that feel like an okay way to proceed? Okay. So can I, in terms of how are folks feeling, kind of warm, cold, or warm or cold, or somewhere, or a lukewarm, I guess, somewhere in between, on about advancing just the content of the small and planning grant applications themselves to be, the content there to be finalized. And I will just kind of call on you in the order in which you appear on my screen. Shanice?
I think that, you know, I'm hearing from other committee members that we're trusting our judgment and we're okay with the first year. Those words just don't feel, it doesn't feel like the best we can do, but I'd be willing to ride with it. And I'd like to consider, I'd just like to consider that other pathway, but I'd vote for it. And here I am just stating my reservations.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Shanice. Faith?
I am for advancing the small and planning grant application content to be finalized.
Jeffrey?
I'm warm on advancing the small and planning grant application. I think we're going to learn a lot this first year. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Maria?
Same as Jeffrey. Warm.
Thanks. Thanks, Maria. Robin?
I'm warm. Ditto.
Thanks, Robin. Rampeace?
Warm.
Andrea?
Also warm.
Megan?
I think I have to clarify something first. My understanding is that the concern that Shanice has raised is more about the point distribution, not what we're saying warm and cold on right now, right? We're saying warm and cold simply on the language and the application. That has nothing to do with the point distribution. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
Okay, I am warm on advancing the small planning grant content.
Michael?
I am warm.
Is anybody warm enough to offer up a proposal on this so that we can check that one off the list and then then maybe figure out a path that feels good for the scoring distribution?
Sure. I propose that we advance the small and planning grant application content to be finalized.
Second.
Thanks for putting that on the screen for me.
Thanks, Andrea. And Robin seconded. Okay, so now we'll just go through real quick and I'll ask you to, if you agree or disagree. Shanice?
Agree.
Thanks. Faith?
Oh, I agree.
Jeffrey?
I agree.
Maria?
Agree. Agree.
Rainface?
Aye.
Megan?
Agree.
And Michael?
I agree.
All right. Thank you all very much for that. It is 7:30 right now, which is when so we're running a little bit behind, which is totally fine, but 7:30 is when we're supposed to take our break. So I'm gonna suggest that we do take the break now, and everybody kind of get some water and stretch, and then we can come back to this conversation around the scoring distribution and how to move forward there. So it's 7:31 now, so let's come back at 7:41. is 7:41.
Let's give everyone a minute to at least come back.
Yeah, looks like Jeffrey is connecting to audio.
You switched places on my screen, Katie.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, and it looks like Jeffrey is connected now to audio. Andrea, are you with us? We'll give Andrea one more minute and then just get going. Sam, maybe in the interest of time, we should get going and Andrea will join us when she's back.
Okay, thank you. As we move into hopefully our next proposal, I think what I just want to start out with sharing, and I was trying to reflect on what a lot of the changes that we've made coming out of the public comment period and then coming to the draft, that we have in front of you here. And a lot of that feedback, and as we focused, and I should acknowledge that those were organizations that were BIPOC led. And a lot of that feedback was a reflection on the fact that a lot of our particular culturally specific organizations have historically had to focus on service delivery, whether it's working for the county or other groups where they don't necessarily get the benefit of having a membership base or having necessarily the overhead rates or whatever else that other organizations do get to have. And as a result, they have had to focus on immediate needs of their community organizations. And this was in the discussion to say that it isn't necessarily a function, it wasn't for them a function of size as to the fact that whether they had the ability to apply for these grants or could do this work or demonstrate the specific experience around this work. It really was the type of work these organizations got to do in the past and had to do, and now the opportunities that PCEF is presenting for them. And so, and I think that further was certainly shown in the application support grants, as there are organizations that we very much thought that would come in and have shared with us just how tough it is for them to be able to have resources and work to be able to apply for the grants. And they came in and said, oh no, we're over 20. And yet there are also organizations that came in at 4 or 5 staff in the application support grants that have demonstrated substantial experience in implementing Portland Housing Bureau projects and everything else, just because of the nature of the way that their organization is structured. So I think as we go into this, I really would ask because I think our focus was on prioritizing, making sure that the organization that is applying for the grant in the lead applicant role reflects the community they serve and has the demonstrated experience in connecting to that community. And so I do want to, as we move into, as I hope we get to a proposal, ask just what are we trying to get at in the extent that we want to push on this one and focus on this one. What are we trying to get at by providing additional points for small organizations? And maybe just as I've said this before, but I think, you know, I want to say it, and I think we'll come back ideally as the RFP is out, so that, and it may be something that actually we present sooner than that, just around, it's been a commitment of ours to be able to go forth after we close out the RFP and dissect exactly who has applied to our grant, what type of grants did they apply to, exactly what sizes did they apply to, did we right size this? And these are some of the questions we expect to ask at the tail end of the application in terms of the process of applying for our grants itself. And what was that experience for them, to make sure where did we strike the right balance, where did we miss that? Because it will be critical in turning around and shaping and breaking apart and figuring out how we go back out to the community with future RFPs. So that sort of analysis and deep dive is something we plan to do, and plan to bring that back to the committee, because we know that it's important in teasing out how did we do in our first go. And so I wanna just share that bit before we get some. Ideally, we get a proposal. And so with that, I think I'd love to ask for a proposal and certain additional thoughts as they relate to a proposal.
I'm willing to make the proposal, and then we'll see if additional comments come up. I propose to accept the small, large, and planning scoring distribution.
Second.
Thanks, Faith and Rankeith. So I'm gonna call on each of you and ask you to say if you agree or disagree, or you would have a point of discussion. Shanice?
Agree.
Jeffrey?
Agree.
Maria?
Agree.
Robin?
Agree.
Andrea?
Agree.
Megan?
Agree.
And Michael?
I agree.
That was the greatest birthday gift I could.
Got that recorded for the record. All right.
I just want to say,
all.
can I say
Sorry,
something real quick? It's Michael again.
Of course.
We've listened to hundreds of people, tons of organizations. We brought in our own knowledge, and we've gotten here. I'm impressed. I feel like 2020, like this vote, these last two votes have just felt like resignation, but I think we did it. I think we're doing good. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. And I will say that as staff, we definitely appreciate being pushed in this regard to be bold. And now we're going to move on to the next part of the agenda, which is about funding allocations. And this is the same graph that you saw last time. I just kind of wanted to have it in the deck as a reminder, in case everybody hasn't memorized all of these numbers. The donut there shows the target funding allocations that are noted in the code, and we're in the ballot initiative. Don't try and add them up because the math doesn't work exactly right. And then the bullets on the screen, the top three are allocations that the committee has already made, and kind of the approximate value of what is left to grant. And so we had some dialogue about this at the last meeting, and you provided us some input in kind of listening back to that recording and reviewing the notes. The main points that the committee brought forth were that you kind of, in different words from different people, but were that there seemed to be a desire to maximize flexibility in this funding in this round, and also to create a signal and to also be able to provide some sort of a signal or assurance to applicants. So wanting to balance both of those things. And just as a reminder, so that for you all and for the public, just being able to provide assurance to people in different funding categories that we intend to fund projects in all of those categories. So the recommendations that staff are bringing back to the committee for your kind of consideration and discussion are to publish in the RFP and kind of in our other communications an expectation that we will meet the target ranges that are defined in the code, but with with explicit flexibility depending on the number and the quality of the applications. So to Michael's point last time, if we don't have enough kind of high quality applicants to, hit the mark in one funding category, but we have a bunch in another one that we won't have to leave money on the table. And then the second bullet is sort of speaks to that, to allow unused funds from one funding area to be spent in other funding areas. We are recommending that we do not set minimum thresholds for scoring. And the primary rationale there is that we don't know what the applications that we are going to receive really look like and what kinds of scores will come out of the tool that we have just developed. And so once we're on the other side of that, I think we'll have a good idea of like, okay, so we know like a project that we feel is really solid and kind of a good PCEF project should have at least, I don't know, 30% of total points or something like that. And we might be in a better position then to be able to set some thresholds. But this year it feels like might be a bit premature. And then the last bullet is to allow the scoring panels to identify projects that are not recommended for funding. So I know it's been a while since we've talked about the review process, but so each of there are 5 folks on a scoring panel and everybody scores individually, but then there is this, and then there's an opportunity for applicant feedback, and then there is a conversation, a meeting that happens with the committee. And in that meeting, the sort of that panel, or not the committee, but that scoring panel will come to a final score. Sorry, I got distracted by Amanda, and I just realized that we had a guest for the next part of our agenda. So I think that we can get through this though in about 10 minutes. And then if we need to have the discussion after the next part of the agenda, we'll just do a little bit of rearranging. So when the scoring panel comes together and kind of has some dialogue and comes up with a final score for each application, they can also they can not just send a list of scores and kind of their feedback on the application to the full committee for recommendation decisions, but they could also say, this is the score that this project got, and we do not recommend it for funding, and here is why. So kind of distributing that, distributing some of the kind of, not responsibility, because ultimately the full committee are the ones that hold the responsibility for recommendations, but distributing some of the eyes that are looking at whether or not the sort of a funding recommendation should be made. The full committee has the authority to make recommendations, to recommend funding for grants regardless of what their score is. And so there's kind of that additional step there where if there was a project that did not score particularly well and didn't seem like a good project, that the scoring panel would have the opportunity to say, we don't think this should be recommended, and the full committee would also have that opportunity. So all of that to say, I mean, that's kind of why people set minimum thresholds, is to avoid a situation in which you have more money than good projects. I don't think that that is going to be our situation, but because this is the first year, we don't really know, and we don't want to be kind of put in a position where we don't want to put you in a position where you feel like there's not a way to kind of say, no, this project is not good, and we don't recommend it. Are there thoughts on this? Robin?
Yeah, is this an opportunity to ask questions? Is that basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I have two questions. One is, let's say an application really scores bad, scores a 1, and out of 100 points or whatever. I mean, really scores bad. And if there's no minimum thresholds, is the mechanism for denying that grant what you say down here is the last bullet item, allow scoring panels to identify projects that are not recommended for funding? I'm just kind of curious what that mechanism is if there's still funding available in that bucket, but there's an application that really scores bad. What's the mechanism there? And then the second question is, again, regarding the last panel, last bullet item, if I think what you're saying is that the scoring panel has the ability to override the points that have been allocated, and doesn't that introduce subjectivity into the decision-making process, and doesn't that then present I'm not a lawyer, some opportunity for libel or kind of inappropriate decision making? I'm sure there's a better term, but I think hopefully you know what I'm talking about, because you're introducing subjectivity as opposed to this number scoring based system that we spent the last 6 months ironing out and getting feedback from the community.
Yeah, I think that I guess a couple of things, and I'm not a lawyer either, I should state for the record, but that there is subjectivity in this process, and there is some subjectivity in all grant making processes. So that is kind of just a little bit inherently there. And in terms of the mechanism for not recommending a project, even if there is funding available, I think that there's two parts, right? Like there is the part where the scoring panel could advance a score of 1 to the committee and say, this one only got 1. We do not recommend it for funding, and this is why. I mean, they should probably come with a rationale. Ultimately, they're not making a decision. They're just sort of making a recommendation to the scoring or to the full committee, because the full committee then could override that, or they could decide, they could make a decision to not fund to not fund a different project that was recommended for funding. So those are the 2 points. I don't want to kind of comment on, I guess, a legal question. Sam, I don't know if Sam is also not a lawyer, if you want to comment on the legal question, but.
No, not from that. I mean, I think this is our first year out the gate with this, and I think that there is a lot of eyes on sort of how you all will be making your decisions, and so because we know we're going to be getting such a wide range of applications, the scoring panel and process ultimately helps you all do that in a way that brings transparency to the public. But for many reasons, you may, whether it's geographical balance, whether it's one thing or another, there are reasons that we've identified, because you can't capture everything in scoring, in scoring criteria, and make scoring criteria get everything. So there's reasons why we've at least taken an initial attempt at identifying some of those reasons why you would do something differently. But certainly there would be reasons where an applicant could bring a legal challenge, and that's the reason it'll be really important that we are in whatever decisions are made, that the scoring criteria aids those decisions that are made, but that in addition to that, there's justifications that are clearly spelled out around that. And we will, in that process, we will certainly be closely connected with our city attorney's office, just to make sure that any justification you bring does have legal standing. So I won't speak to the exact reasons why something would, and Faith, others may speak to that with the exact reasons why something may not be, why a decision or justification may not be legally sound. But I think that the whole process we built here was in order to align with certainly best practices, but also have a transparent approach and mechanism.
I appreciate that, and I think my only follow-up comment then is, I think sometimes a lot of this is about expectations, and I think if that's the case, what you just shared, then I want to make sure that people very clearly understand that this process of how it is possible for the scoring panel to not recommend a project because of other criteria that is not met. So if that language and that expectation is clearly up front, then I feel better about it.
Thanks, Robin. Michael?
I'm going to continue on with what Robin was just talking about, and I think that I mean, I'm Mr. Subjective, right? So I really think that this is all subjective. Otherwise, I think I could just be a Scantron machine, and you could just fill in bubbles, and I could present to you answers that across the board are all equal and fair and scored exactly the same. But that's not what I want to do as somebody who is representing the community and in this grant making process. I really want some flexibility. I want to be able to think and read into things. I want to be able to make decisions based on evidence and energy and everything else out there, right? And so I think that, and I think there has to be reasons given, and I think that we have to defend the decisions we make, but I think that subjectivity, I think the world lives in gray areas, right? And so subjective thought is required in this. At least I hope it's required, because and I guess I think we should make that clear, that they aren't just getting they're getting a point scale, but that point scale isn't just like you filled in the bubbles and you met these criteria, therefore you get X score, and that puts you in X placement of getting dollars, X number of dollars, right? Like if we're just doing math, then I don't see any reason for me to be there. but I hope that there's subjectivity, and I get to put some thought into this, and that we aren't going to just go purely on a numbers game.
Thanks, Michael. Sorry, go ahead, Robin.
I'm, you know, I totally hear what you're saying, and I think for me is I just want to avoid, you know, an impression or perception that there is, you know, backroom dealing that's going on, and I think, you know, it's just really important to be very transparent with what we're saying, and I agree with what you just said that, you know, if we turn down something, we need to give an explanation, we need to defend that. So, yeah, I'm just sensitive to the backroom dealing.
Thanks, Robin. Ranti?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Michael, for your points, and Robin, your question. I think I'm used to most grant-making processes where you just end up having more spectacular applications than you can actually fund, and so it's usually kind of becomes a non-issue, and you don't have to, you know, take the extra process of identifying the projects that are not recommended for funding. It feels awkward, but it sounds like it could be necessary for this third bullet point if you wanted to reshift unused funds to other funding areas, or if maybe there's just more money than there are good applications. I think, you know, I think for the sake of consistency, I think maybe it'd be good to make sure that we receive good guidance from staff to ensure that each scoring panel is applying it consistently, that doesn't feel arbitrary. You know, like I think just like we've had discussions in the past, like when do we feel like a group is ready to do a project or not ready to do a project? That's very subjective or arbitrary. That maybe we probably wouldn't land on why we identify a project, you know, not recommended for funding. So yeah, I think, you know, I'm comfortable with what's being proposed here, just encouraging just more staff guidance around just the consistency on how that would be applied. Yeah, that's my only two cents. And to Michael's point, I think there is subjectivity to how we score. It's just that we kind of balance each other out as a committee around how we our own different scoring preferences as best as we want to. It's not really rocket. It's not like really like math. Like we all score the same. It's, you know, we'll see a range of scores, and I think there'll be a process around how we balance each other out. It's just how we make these final recommendations. That's more of an art than a science.
Thanks, Ranti. So we are at about 8:10, and we do have a guest for our next agenda item. So I think that I would like to table this for now if we can, and then maybe we can come back to it afterwards. I am going to, I'm not sure if everybody's screen setup is such that you have two screens. Do most people have two screens or just one? One, okay. So since there are folks with one screen, I'm gonna just I'm gonna stop the screen share so that it's easier for this part of the presentation so that you can see each other more easily.
Thank you, Katie. Gotta move my screens around now. Give me a second.
Okay. And I believe that Maria is going to introduce Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah. I guess before I turn it over to Maria to speak to the great work of the subcommittee, this is, you know, the committee a little while ago with, and it looks like we've got Laura John joining here too. So, Laura, you're present with us?
Yes, I am.
Awesome, thank you. I just want to thank, and I think there'll be a lot of things to go on, but want to thank Laura John through this effort, as rightfully so, you know, you all acknowledge that we did not quite do right in finishing out the first first cohort of this committee, and set us on a path where we would at least try to address that. And there's many ways in which we could address that. And I want to acknowledge that in going out and setting out for recruitment in order to bring in a committee member with deep connections and experience within the Indigenous communities, Native American communities, that is not the only step. But before I turn this over to Maria, I just want to acknowledge that we do have Amanda Squemfen-Yazi. And Amanda, please tell me if I pronounce that right. It's Amanda Squemfen-Yazi.
Yes, that's correct. Good job.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we do have Amanda here. I let her know that she's not expected to provide any comments or anything like that, but I also said you all may ask anything. So I just want to acknowledge she is here and present with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maria, who is one of the 3 subcommittee members on the recruitment subcommittee.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again, PCEF staff and Laura John, for supporting our subcommittee with our recruitment. We spent several weeks really trying to think this through and to discuss the task in front of us. And, you know, I think everyone in this room has done a great job in helping us get the word out for the recruitment, and Laura and Sam for arranging conversations for us and consultations from peers representing the Native American communities, so that we can get more insight before we make such a big recommendation to this group. On behalf of the subcommittee, you know, I'm just really pleased to be able to share a recommendation that we came to. We unanimously want to recommend Amanda to this PCEF committee. I think Amanda's experiences really stood out to us with her resume and her written narrative. She demonstrated her commitment and her leadership and service to Native people and priority communities. You know, her materials and her experience emphasized her drive to change systems and build community power and elevate solutions from people who are experiencing inequities. And, you know, her experience also emphasized the importance of power building mechanisms such as voting and grassroots organizing and taking a seat at decision-making tables. So with that, Michael, Megan, and I had a simple choice to be able to bring Amanda's experience to all of you, and we hope that tonight we can make that proposal official with all of your confidence behind our recommendation. So thank you, Amanda, for applying, and thank you, Laura, too, for ensuring that we had this clear path and this task at hand and fulfilled it with all of our City of Portland staff guidance. Sam, do we need to make room for a discussion with other subcommittee, or?
I think I appreciate you, Maria, setting that context. I just would love. I know that Michael and Megan. I want to make sure you all had you both had opportunities to share any additional comments, and then certainly we can talk about what comes next.
I'd just like to say that I was. Oh, am I?
No, that was Megan who was muted. Sorry, go ahead. Yep, we can hear you.
I just wanted to say that I was really impressed with Amanda's depth of lived experience. That really stood out to me when reviewing her application for this. I was really impressed with that. I was really impressed with her involvement in sort of direct action and actually being not just like kind of a theoretical mindset, but an on the ground active person in and being an active change maker in the communities. And so, yeah, I think that I was, by the time we had finished talking to Marty, Ray, Jessica, to Laura, John, amongst each other, I would really highly recommend Amanda for a position on the committee.
Hi, yeah, and as the third M on the committee, we have 3 M's. I echo my fellow committee members. Thanks, Maria, for that pretty thorough overview. I learned a lot in the process, and I'm enthusiastic, as we said, unanimously recommending Amanda. And I guess I would just add, it's all pretty detailed in that memo that got sent around last meeting. But another thing that stood out to us was that Amanda has some experience in naming and working to dismantle white supremacy in organizations. And we thought that was a good thing to have on a good experience to bring into our committee. So Amanda, we look forward to you doing that with us. So that's something that stood out. And then there's been lots of thank yous shared to Laura, John, to staff. And I also wanted to, I know our committee really wants to make sure we send a giant thank you to Andrea, our committee member who is really graciously agreeing to make space on this committee for this really important perspective. And we're humbled, Andrea, by your move. And we're gonna miss, we're just appreciate it. So thank you so much. And perhaps you want to say something at some point.
And I think I'd love to give the floor to Laura, John, who I just want to, through this entire process with the committee, with the recruitment, has been instrumental in making sure that we're as thoughtful as possible. I don't know I recognize that there's many missteps, and I appreciate, Laura, that you were there to help us think about how we write some of those missteps.
Thank you, Sam. I wanted to take a moment to express my appreciation to the PCEF staff as well as the other committee members for their mindfulness, for their willingness to reflect, to admit missteps, and have the commitment and drive to course correct, especially moved by that decision for a committee member to step down to provide space for an Indigenous person to be a voice with this committee, and how important that is as this work continues. And I think also how historic it is for the city of Portland. I have not heard that this has been done before, so I do want to bring that forward and just, again, commend everyone for their courage and willingness to do something different and to do it immediately rather than say, we'll do this the next time, which is typically what occurs so often for members of our community, the Native American community in Portland, when we bring something forward to say that this needs to be changed in order to be equitable and to include our community. So this is really a monumental moment that I hope will continue to expand into the other work that is happening with the city of Portland and within the city of Portland. So again, wanted to express my thanks. I also want to express my congratulations to Amanda. I have seen her over the last several months working in community, sort of observing from afar, and I think she is going to bring some fire, bring heart, bring commitment, bring resilience, and her brilliance as well to the committee. I'm really excited to see how she takes this seat and runs with it. So congratulations, Amanda.
Okay. With that, thank you, Laura. Now it's for the committee. At this point, I think it's a committee discussion, and ideally, to the extent that you all want to discuss and talk, I think what we'd look for is a proposal to nominate Amanda to replace Andrea on the committee that we would forward to the mayor and city council.
Amanda, I'm so excited to meet you, at least on Zoom. It has been such an incredible honor to be with the committee these last 9 months. I applied for this work because I really wanted to support this incredible project at its infancy. And of course, I wanted to give away a lot of money to incredible, exciting projects. And I think one of the things that I can see here is a drive to do this work right. And an understanding that that doesn't mean we always get it right the first time, that there's a real commitment to reflecting, to taking in information, and to making course corrections when we have to. And I really want to say to Laura John, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us in the spring. I think we were listening before that to some discomfort inside ourselves around this decision, but you really called us to action, and I so appreciate that. And I have just absolute confidence that drive to improve and to find new ways of doing and being in the world is going to continue. And particularly with the passion and experience that Amanda will clearly bring to this role. I'm just thrilled to see what you do as part of the committee and to support all of you in this incredible work.
Thanks, Andrea.
I can make the proposal if nobody else had anything to say.
Ramses, you had your hand up, but then you put it down. Did you have a question or a comment?
I want to make sure folks have a chance to talk, and I hope maybe before we make a motion, maybe I don't know if Amanda wants to share anything before we vote, but I just want to recognize Laura John's leadership in helping interrupt this process, and I definitely want to recognize Andrea's leadership in making the space, and I think that's going to leave an imprint for me as a leader in terms of how I grow and how I think about making space for others. So that's something I'm going to meditate for and moving forward. And Amanda, just reading your application, I'm excited. I think I'm glad for this opportunity, and you're the kind of person we would stop and flip our process just to make that space. And I think PCEF is better for it. So I'm really excited to get to know you and learn from you as a leader. So I'm really excited. And I don't know if there's anything you'd like to share, Amanda, before we take a vote. Anything you'd want to share about what you're excited or interested to do here within PCEF.
Yeah, thank you everyone for all your kind words. Really wasn't necessary. And I really want to say thank you so much to Laura John. I wasn't really sure about how this process was working. I kind of been in contact with Sam over the last few months, and Andrea, the sacrifice you made for this to be possible. I just really want to say thank you so much. Like, this is really unheard of, and it really means a lot, not only to me, but to the Indigenous community. Like, for so long, our voices have been silenced, and you are literally uplifting our voices. So thank you so much. But for the most part, being part of PCEF, I mean, I was one of the many canvassers out there who just volunteered, threw myself into the ring, and went to go grab a clipboard from a local area around here. And going through the training, I was like, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. And, you know, a big shout out to Carrie Waters, who really instilled this passion within me. She stayed on me, and every time that I had questions, she was always there to answer. She was always there to help me further understand things I didn't truly understand. And when this finally passed, you know, it was like a moment, I'm sure like many of you, we were crying because it was just such a historic moment. And again, I just want to say my gratitude to every single one of you who are on this call, just here listening, being present, being willing to work after 8 p.m. and just, you know, really be present and feel so passionate about PCEF. But again, thank you so much. And I'm just really honored to be on this phone call with all of you.
Thank you, Amanda. Andrea, unless are there any other questions or comments? I think I heard Andrea offer to make a proposal, but I'm gonna take her up on that.
I propose that we submit a nomination of Amanda for the seat that I've been in on the Portland Clean Energy Benefits Fund Committee.
Second.
Thanks, Ranfis. All right, so I'm gonna just go around. You guys have shifted order, so it's gonna be a different order this time, and ask if you agree or disagree. Megan?
Agree.
Faith?
I wholeheartedly agree. Welcome, Amanda.
Robin?
I bittersweetly agree. Amanda, I look forward to working with you. And Andrea, you know, I hope this is not a farewell, but it's been a pleasure working with you. Thank you.
Maria?
I agree.
Michael?
I agree enthusiastically.
And Jeffrey?
I agree.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Was that everybody? And Ranfis?
No, Shanice, I apologize. This is what happens when I change my screen and everybody gets moved around. Shanice, of course.
I enthusiastically agree, and just thank you for this leadership, Andrea.
Okay, that really is everyone. Thank you. Thank you all for that. And thank you, Amanda, for logging on in the evening. Nice to meet you over Zoom. I'm sure we'll be getting to know you more in the future. And thank you also, Laura John, for joining.
Oh, you muted on us, Katie. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Really appreciate you all this evening, and I think we will follow up. I will follow up separately about the timing, going to City Council, and making this smooth, and talking to Amanda's onboarding. So Amanda, I will follow up with you, and I'd love to figure out whether folks want to. There's a lot that once we get the RFP, but I'd love to figure out if folks want to get to a park celebration sometime, and just spend some time together, at least acknowledging. And acknowledging that we'll see Andrea in other spaces, but maybe not the PCEF space so regularly. Okay, with that, I don't want to. I wish that we had just ended with this and ended on such a positive note. But what we are, and I think I don't know, Katie, if you want to reshare your screen. And actually, I don't even think we need to reshare the screen. I think we know the next agenda item. I will send it over to Ramses, but it was to pick up the discussion on the city's response and the committee's desire to engage and follow up with the city on the 4th and Montgomery letter. So the PCEF committee sent a letter to the city council expressing its frustration and realm of other things, and supporting requests that Oregon tradeswomen constructing Hope, the Metropolitan Alliance for Workforce Equity, had written in response to a hate incident, a racist hate incident at the 4th and Montgomery building in downtown. And so in response to that, city council, or the city, through various different bodies, have shared some of their correspondence with both Anderson Construction, who is the prime contractor on that building, have shared some of their correspondence to the Metropolitan Alliance for Workforce Equity, and some correspondence that Prosper Portland has done. So maybe that's just a little bit of background context. And the last piece is they've offered, Lester Spittler, the Chief Procurement Officer, has offered at least to meet with the PCEF committee. So I want to just share just some of that background context before I turn it to Ramses to just kind of open the discussion up. So with that, Ramses.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, and thanks everyone on the committee for demonstrating leadership on this and crafting the letter, as well as sharing personal experiences within the construction industry. As Sam noted, there has been a response from the city. You know, I don't want to rehash the details, but what I'll also add is that the city will be taking steps in September to convene community stakeholders through the Fair Contracting Forum around some of the specific requested items from community and those next steps. As Sam noted, you know, I think the city, acknowledges, well, the city has acknowledged that I think their response to community was slow, and I think there is that recognition. I think there's that recognition. I don't think there's want to harp on too many of the excuses for why that happened. But I think there's an opportunity here, I think, for us just to learn what the city is doing, and not to assume there isn't work being done. They did offer for us to meet with Lester Spittler, again, the Chief Procurement Officer, who oversees many of the contracts that go out, working with different bureaus within the city of Portland, as well as some of the compliance processes that goes on, especially on the construction site. So, you know, I think maybe the discussion here today is what are some appropriate steps given that offer within here, the committee, if folks are interested in having a larger discussion with the city, if we're interested in following, getting periodic updates on where the city is progressing on the systemic changes that they will be making. I will, you know, suggest a recommendation that I do think it makes sense for us to meet with Chief Procurement Officer Lester Spittler, just to learn more about what's since happened and what are those next steps. And it could be a great next step for us as a committee to continually learn in this space around the construction industry and what lessons learned we as a committee can learn as we think about year 2 or year 3 around our grant making processes. So I'll pause there. I know I said a lot, but just curious how do folks here in the committee feel like we should proceed in terms of next steps?
Michael? Am I audible now also? Yeah, okay. Michael?
I'm not sure I have a next steps question, but I guess, you know, we in the construction industry know how often this happens, and I am quite positive that it will probably happen on a PCEF worksite also. So my concerns aren't only what other city departments and how they react to it and how contractors react to it, but what in the future, because we will, I mean, I can almost guarantee that we'll have to deal with this probably sooner than later on one of our construction sites, and probably more than once. What is our reaction going to be? What steps are we going to take when it happens to our sites?
I'm thinking I'll turn this to Janet because this is some of the conversation that we're having right now with partners at Prosper and others, just to tease out what they're doing. And so we are going through and reviewing what are the elements that we are going to be including in the grant agreements around what are they required to do. But this is a conversation that we're actively having right now. And Janet, I don't know if you want to add any more, since I know you're in the midst of some of those conversations.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And if you recall, there's so many pieces that we've chatted about and things that were a few weeks or a few months ago feel like a few lifetimes ago, but we have spent some time talking about workforce and contractor plans and agreements. And so you might recall that anyone who is receiving PCEF funding grants is going to sign on to a workforce and contractor equity agreement. And we're working on elements, and some of those, as you know, show up in the scoring. So they talk about things that they're going to be doing. And we're tightening up in the initial drafts of the application. There was a little bit about what are the things that you do to cultivate a welcoming and inclusive environment and help people recruit, retain, and advance. And while that's something we consider in the application, we're also tightening that up on this thou shalt and what you must do and what you must comply with. So we're working with the folks with Malway and Prosper just to make sure that what we come up with is aligning, but there will be things that are required in the agreement. End of story. That's what we have. So whether that's postings, trainings, and you all, you know, we're working on that, and that'll be with what gets sent out.
Shanice?
I think as a committee, it would be really great for us to consider having that conversation, and especially as it relates to just workplace environment and some of the potential solutions that we might be able to sort through, and lifting up exactly the voices that have kind of led us to make this initial action. So I resonate with that, and thank you, Runfees, for your leadership, and as well as everyone else involved.
Robin?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with, I believe the gentleman's name is Lester, but to be honest, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I kind of want to speak and hear from Anderson. You know, they're the people that are responsible for this, and you know, I want to send a message that we're paying attention, right? And that, you know, Lester, you know, again, I don't know him, but he's just a messenger, and I want to, you know, have a conversation with, you know, the prime or whatever, you know, they're called. So that's my thought. I don't know if it's appropriate, but you know, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Maria?
Yeah, I'm glad we're having this discussion. I think, as Janet said, there are some mechanisms to create that kind of accountability or agreement through contracts, but there's a lot of harm of all sizes that kind of occur on and off the clock, and ways that we can establish better accountability in the community through this work. I mean, justice-oriented work, especially for clean energy, with community organizations, like involves so many relationships. And I think that there's a way we can continue to model the type of community accountability when harm is done. And, you know, this is not just like racial-based violence, but, you know, gender-based violence and all kinds of other things. And I think we are trying to innovate in that space and try to bring this conversation to the forefront with so many other organizations who are probably dealing with this in real time. So I just have a lot of like heavy feelings around that, and hope that we can start to model that in our expectations and find a way to mitigate harm and also create healing when harm happens with organizations that we care about too, who could be involved in this type of conflict.
Thanks, Maria. We have Megan and then Jeffrey and then Michael. Megan?
Yeah, thanks. I think that one role maybe we can play as PCEF is an accountability partner, I guess, to those who are calling for accountability as like a city sort of entity ourselves. There's been a lot of like calls for action, and maybe we can be part of the follow-up and say, have you done it? Because reading some of the responses, a lot of the stuff is like they're promising to do stuff. So I think maybe that's one role we can play, but also for our own project specifically. Sadly, Michael is probably right in that this will happen again. It's like that, and on our projects. And Janet, I'm glad to hear that like there's efforts underway, and I wonder if at some point we can talk about that as a committee and maybe get some feedback from. This would be a good place to meet, where we check in with the community about whether some of the stuff we're setting up is actually robust enough. You know, signs are great, but I don't have a whole lot of confidence that does much. I'm more wondering about like, is there a reporting mechanism that can be, I don't know if it needs to be for our project specifically, but a clearer reporting mechanism. It sounds like there wasn't a clear line that had any sort of follow through associated with it. And then like an accountability and an investigation and accountability mechanism. So if that doesn't already exist through city funded projects, maybe that's a role we can play. And then we would be expecting that all of our projects sign on to to upholding that. So those are off the cuff, but I do think this is an area where I would want to hear from community, you know, those who are kind of on the front line of experiencing this a little bit more before offering, you know, before I would feel comfortable signing off on like a bunch of recommendations or anything. But thank you, Ramtis, again for shepherding this for us.
Jeffrey?
I pretty much was going to say what Andrea said. As Michael said, we should expect this to happen on our projects. It's systemic, so it's not going to happen overnight. I think this happened, unfortunately, but I think it's forcing us to be proactive on our end and make sure that we are addressing this prior to it happening. I think one of the things that this did bring to light is that Anderson was ill-equipped to deal with a situation like this because they hadn't been proactive about it. So what this is allowing us to do on our end is make sure that we don't have that same issue, that we actually are proactive. We have protocols in place. One of the biggest things that I liked that one of the recommendations was that they have an anonymous tip line for things of this nature. So not just, you know, going to the superintendent or just going to the foreman where it can kind of be squashed. You know, it immediately goes to people that actually can do something about it. So it doesn't, we're not talking about this a month later. So I think that this, again, it's unfortunate this happened, but I think it gives us the opportunity to be proactive and make sure that this mentality is not tolerated on any of our projects, and that people know that coming into it.
Michael?
I'd just like to back up what everybody said so far. I think that you know, I read the letters and Anderson Construction. I don't want us to ever open with what Anderson Construction opened with, which is we find it incredibly disturbing that somebody would put a horrible hate symbol on our construction site. Like, oh my God, how did this happen? I mean, this is happening like every day on your construction sites and you know it, right? Like, and we know that it's going to happen on some of our construction sites also. And we should not have a shocked response or a fake shocked response when it happens, right? And I think that Jeffrey and I can tell you that it will happen. And so when it does happen, I hope none of us are shocked, but that we do have specific policies, procedures in place to address it, and address it intentionally, and I don't want to use the word forcefully, but forcefully, right? That this is not to be tolerated, because it's been tolerated. It's been tolerated by Anderson Construction. It's been tolerated by the City of Portland. It's been tolerated from top to bottom in the construction industry, and still is. It is still tolerated, right? And construction is still often the good old boys club, and so it is tolerated, and it is oftentimes encouraged. We should not be shocked when it happens on one of the sites that we're funding. So I think that we need to be proactive in putting out information that this will not be tolerated, but also we need to be reactive, be ready to be reactive when it does happen.
Yeah, thank you. This has been helpful. So I think what I've at least heard here is just the importance of being proactive around our own measures, as well as potentially being just another accountability voice within what are we actually structurally changing, as well as what can we learn. It sounds like staff is PCEF staff here is taking some steps in engaging with community. I think it makes sense maybe for us, whether it's a small group, to meet with Lester Spittler. Maybe we can think about learn a little bit more about what the city is doing, identify where some next steps we can take together with his office. And then I think there are multiple processes around trying to address this question systemically, both, it sounds like within the Fair Contracting Forum, sounds like there's some conversations with Prosper. I know Metro has been running their Construction Career Pathways project, where they're also trying to address harassment systemically. But I think it seems like there's a good opportunity for us to just learn more what's being done, and helps us assess as a committee what more we can do. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to just keep learning as a committee, as our staff is, as PCEF staff is learning as well. So I will, if it makes sense, I will share some of the dates to meet with Lester Spittler for folks who might be interested in this call to try to help identify some next steps. So I will do that. Does that make sense? Or is there anything else that could be clearer that I missed? Well, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone in the committee. Thanks Sam. Thanks Janet, and all the work that you're doing to keep us on the learning curve here on this. And I hope we can report back here, if not the next meeting, a succeeding meeting in terms of meeting with Lester Spittler and other next steps. Thanks everyone.
Looks like Robin had a
Yeah, just a clarification question. Will PCEF grants and projects be going through Lester's office, or how does that work? Or it'll be going through the nonprofits and then to the construction firms?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the city, grants don't go through our grants aren't going to go through procurement. In some other places they do, but they do not here. But we do work with our procurement office, in particular around leveraging their assets around, I mean, certainly our contracting that we do directly for the program, but also we are in conversations with them around a lot of our monitoring platforms that we've talked about, that folks would be reporting their subcontractor or their workforce utilization. So we connect them in a few different ways. And I think what we'll do as staff is we'll check in before that meeting gets scheduled to Lester for whomever's there or whomever can attend, and we'll send those. We'll get those from Ramfis and coordinate those. But we'll also we'll share whatever information we can that we have around existing programs, whatever else, just to level set for folks to know some of the context of existing work that's there. So we'll make sure we provide that for folks that'll be in that meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. If I can just quickly add, it's also called out in our legislation to try to take on the best procurement practices from the city of Portland. So there's also a piece there that kind of relates. I think probably the staff is generally the lead on that, but I think it's, you know, good for us to just be learning as well, especially on this given topic.
Thanks, Ramsey.
Yes. Yeah. There is a lot of that. What I will share is in the work that is happening here, there's just a lot of pollination across bureaus. And so the work that we do, the work that Prosper does, the work that city procurement does, we're collectively learning. And there's a lot of good work that's happening. There's a lot of opportunities to re-explore how things can happen better. So it's certainly, I appreciate that point, Ramfis.
So it is 8:52. So we have about 8 minutes before our meeting, kind of our scheduled meeting time ends. I think because of the decisions that we made or that you all made tonight related to the small and large grant applications and the scoring point distribution, that we'd like to ask to cancel next week's meeting to give staff a little bit more time to kind of hunker down and do move that forward as quickly as we can. We didn't. Does that seem okay to folks? There's no need for a proposal. Just you can find something else to do with your Wednesday night. And then I know that we didn't circle back to the funding allocation conversation. I don't think that we need to, for the purposes of the work that we really need to get done in the short term, we don't necessarily need to make that conversation or kind of close the loop on that conversation. So we can pick it back up at the subsequent meeting, which will be now in 2 weeks. But I did want to make sure that but I did just sort of want to check in because I think what I heard was general agreement with kind of the path that we were going, and I just want to make sure that there's not that folks feel okay about putting off closing out that conversation for a couple weeks. Faith?
I think we might be able to get there, Katie, instead of reopening it again in 2 weeks. Maybe not. Would you do your going around the table with warm and cold and seeing if maybe we're there?
Sure. Do you want to, you want me just to share my screen and you can go ahead and make a proposal?
Sure.
Okay, let's just do that. And then Sam can have a birthday cake. Okay, so can you all
I cheated and had it a little early.
So,
Katie.
Okay, great. So go ahead, Faith.
I propose that we accept this funding allocation for year 1 that maximizes flexibility and gives some signal and assurances to applicants with these 4 particular points. Again, ensuring transparency when this goes out with the grant applications.
I second.
Thanks, Jeffrey. All right, so now we'll just go around and get your, see if folks agree, disagree, or have a point of that they'd like to discuss. Shanice?
Agree.
Maria?
Agree.
Robin?
Agree.
Andrea?
Agree.
Megan?
I agree with this. I had some thoughts. They don't change these bullet points necessarily, so I'm fine just agreeing, and I will email you some thoughts.
That sounds great. Michael?
I agree. I'm really excited to see what our minimum thresholds are for the following year based on the applications we get this year. And then I'd also like to say that if for point number 4, and I don't want to see this change right now because I do agree, but I would like to have something in there also saying that any reasons for not recommending for funding will be explained.
Yeah. Okay. That's everybody. And so that is.
Katie, again, I think, didn't we miss people? Like Jeffrey, I don't think you called on.
Jeffrey seconded.
Oh, my bad. That's what I'm missing.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Nope, that's all right. I only forget one thing per meeting. So I remembered the minutes and got Jeffrey this last time. Any other closing comments in the final 3 minutes of this meeting where we made 4 decisions?
Does this mean that we don't have to meet for another month or 2?
It does not.
We'll find a reason to bring you back.
Then I retract all my votes today.
Hey, Katie, for the record, you missed me. I was on mute. I agree, and I'm excited for us to get some dollars out and start reading applications. So I'm excited that we're moving forward. So thank you.
Dang it. Megan, you were right. Megan, your hand is up.
Yeah, and sorry, Sam, to delay your birthday cake a little longer, but I did want to make a comment just that I'm really proud of us for making all these decisions, and I feel really good about a good package, and we can reflect on it. And I do have a little sensitivity to, I think Shanice and Ranpeace were bringing up some questions for me so I do have this little asterisk, and they're not the only asterisks. So I guess what I'm wondering is all those asterisks, one is around small and emerging nonprofits and seeing and like having a check in about who we're funding. And so I guess my request for staff is if you can kind of compile those asterisks we have raised or create a space where we can like put them together in one place so that we can like create steps in our in the next year, or like, create steps in the year after the granting process where we check on that, and maybe as like in the middle of the decision and after the decision. So just so we have, I would feel better if I knew we had like a document where like all these things that we weren't all 100% happy with, but we were okay enough with. So that's kind of a question I have, like a checklist and maybe data, and making sure we're tracking that data at various points. So then I would feel like a diminished asterisk. I don't know, I'm taking that metaphor really far, sorry, but.
Absolutely, we can do that. And we are tracking all of these things, and I would just note that it was just today, sort of Janet encouraged us to all get coordinated about how we're tracking that kind of as a team so that we can make sure that nothing falls through the crack and we're kind of designing appropriate plans to be able to respond. So. Sam, any closing thoughts?
No. Thank you. Oh, really. And maybe we'll give you a month before you see us again. Maybe.
I hope you really are taking a birthday trip vacation, Sam.
Oh, I'm going I'm going camping first thing tomorrow morning and then out of town. I haven't. Anissa, I will reschedule our check-in together.
Well, happy birthday, Sam. Happy birthday, Megan.
Thank you. Yes, Megan, when's your birthday?
Happy birthday to.
Oh, well, my birthday was the 7th, and it's the big 4-0. So now I'm over the hill.
Oh.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Although today is, it's actually Sam's birthday. Mine was a few days ago.
All right, thank you.
Nice work tonight. I love it.
Bye, everybody. Have fun, Sam.
Wow, be well.
Bye.
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 Good night. Happy birthday.
Thank you.